Hi, this is Peter. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Cane Pole Fishing Instruction. Yes, I'm back sitting on my swing over here by the pond because we're going to talk today about putting it all together. I alluded to that a little bit in some of what we did, especially with the buzzbait. But here it goes. I don't go fishing without more than one rod, ever, unless it's my travel kit, which I will get to in future videos, that I keep in my truck. The reason I say unless it's my travel kit is I have a rod for me and a rod for the wife. That's it in the travel kit. We're keeping that as bare bones as possible to a point. We're also trying to cover all of our bases, and you will see similar things to what I have shown you here, but you'll also see a couple different things. These are multi-purpose rods, and they're a little different, and that's for if we go somewhere like we are getting ready to and can fish. At any rate, I digress. I always take 2 rods. Sometimes I'll take 3 rods. Whether I'm going saltwater fishing, freshwater fishing, live bait, whatever, I try to have 2 rods at least. Catfishing, I will sometimes put out 4, which is a maximum you can from the bank in South Carolina. Now, if I'm in a boat, I have been known to run 8 rods by myself catfishing. Just, that is what it is. The reason behind that is twofold. One, if one rod breaks and I've gone on a fishing trip, I'm still got a rod to use. Sometimes, and in the past, they've been the same rod. I've had several of the same rod. Nowadays, it's more I have a light, medium, and heavy rod for various reasons, which leads me to number 2. The second and other vitally important reason to have more than one rod. If I'm working a spinnerbait, buzzbait, topwater crankbait, popper, whatever, I might get a hit, it might blow up on my lure and miss. That fish generally is not going to run across the lake after it missed a meal. It's going to be looking for another one. If I can set that down, and I've been known to set a buzzbait or even a topwater popper rod down and immediately pick up my rod with my worm on it, and I can cast a worm. Oh, the goose is coming by. I heard rustling in the bushes. At any rate, and I can cast a worm over to where that fish missed. He's likely to be around, and he's likely to see that worm and go, yum, and eat it. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but I would say at least 80% of the time I have done that. I have caught the fish that I missed, or at least one that was right there by me. It ups my fishing percentage quite a bit. I try and keep 2 separate, distinct lures on 2 rods. Sometimes in the case of, having the heavier rod, I'll run 3. Fishing the club tournament, it's a once-a-year thing, or any tournament I've ever been in, I keep multiple rods rigged up. I'll have a spinnerbait on one, crankbait on one, plastic worm rig, or multiple plastic worm rigs, depending on things. Namely, so I don't have to retie every time. Cut one off, put a different rig on. If something's not working, I can just pick up another rod. The other thing is, like I say, that backup throw. I can throw a plastic worm in Texas or wacky rig where something missed a buzzbait and likely catch a fish. It doesn't mean that it happens all the time, but it happens often enough. Another thing is, I might be fishing a Carolina rig, and this is just using worm rigs, out there in the more open water, and up by the bank I see a little splash of a bass eating on minnows. Take a Texas rig or wacky rig and cast it right up in there. I can set my Carolina rig down and let it sit and pick up my other rod and throw it in. If I'm working a crankbait, for example, along a point or whatever, and I see a tree laying down on, say, a rocky point or even a sandy point, I know that tree is likely to hold a fish because it's something different. I can pick up my spinnerbait and flip my spinnerbait up in there and bring my spinnerbait back out without risking the treble hooks of a crankbait getting caught up. Same with a weed bed, or small bed of weeds out in the middle of an open area. It gives me some more versatility to my fishing. It allows for me to use this, switch to that, go back to this, depending on, I don't want to say conditions, because conditions usually denote weather, but what conditions I'm fishing. Weed beds, open water, stumps, you name it. I have that variety. I miss a fish. Heck, I have something, I saw him flare on the spinnerbait, but the spinnerbait was being pulled too fast. I can throw back in with that worm. And notice I'm going back to worms all the time. Yeah, plastic worm is my favorite. Alright, hope that helps a little bit. If you only have one rod, don't despair. If you miss a topwater bite or you see a fish splash up in the shallows, you may have time to switch from whatever lure you have to a plastic worm, especially if you're rigged ready. If you're ready to rig up and you've practiced your knots, you can switch out pretty quickly. That wacky rig is quick and easy as tying on a hook, throwing the worm on, putting the weight in and going. A Carolina rig, pretty much similar. Not a Carolina rig, a Texas rig, pretty much similar. Carolina rig takes a little bit more. It just adds for versatility. I do recommend, over time, you've picked up a rod, you enjoy fishing, pick you up a second rod, even if it's the same rod, even if it suits the same purpose, so you can have two different lures on. We had somebody actually up here fishing on Saturday. Here it is Thursday, so give you a time frame. They had a bobber rig for fishing for brim. She liked using the little crankbaits. He had a spinnerbait and a plastic worm rod, and then they had a couple more other things on a couple more rods. Between them, I think they had about 7 rods that allowed them to do different things. They caught a few fish. I actually let them keep them because they wanted to keep them for dinner. Didn't hurt my population any at all because I never keep any fish. But that again shows that having more than one rod opens your ability. She caught a couple on a crankbait, he caught one on the spinnerbait, and the rest of his were on the plastic worm as far as the bass. She actually caught more brim because she was using one of the little bean-sized spinnerbaits, a little bit bigger than my wife's. Alright, that's pretty much about all I have to say. Oh, one more thing about the multiple rod thing. I like using a little small micro rod for throwing my small beetle spins, or even throwing a little bit of live bait up for brim. And I have a brim rod, a live bait, bobber rig, I guess you could call it, rod, that's about 9 foot long. If I keep those rigged up with a bobber and a hook, and I keep the other one rigged up with a beetle spin, if I get into an area that looks like it has brim, or I see brim bed, I can immediately switch out without having to take my bass tackle off. Just another thought. Alright, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Any questions or comments, please let me know. I know this series hasn't covered everything. I'm going to do a separate video and explain what's going to be going on in the future. And those of you who've been around understand what time of year it is.